had to relocate for the second half of the video. But yeah, Anti-Mai was really, really good and definitely just didn't quite make the top three. Number three, True Power by I Prevail. Now, this album, I did know of I Prevail before this album, and I'd heard their album from 2019, Trauma, and I was just kind of like okay with it. I listened to it a few times, and I thought it was all right, but it didn't really strike a chord with me the way this album did. And this album kind of like came out swinging. I think the first song on the album, There's Fear in Letting Go, is one of my favorite songs of the year. And this is the other album that I bump when I am working out, just because it is such a jam, and it has mostly heavy hitter songs, and I just think it's just great. Like it's probably doesn't objectively score as high as some of the albums lower on the list, but subjectively, it's just the album I keep going back to and I keep listening to, and I just love the mix. I especially love the unclean vocalist. I like when he does like his rap unclean vocals too, which I know a lot of people aren't a fan of, like all the rap esque style on this album, but they're just really good. I just love most of the songs on this album. I love that they do a True Detective nod when they put Rustin Cole's dialogue from True Detective season one in F. Basically the F What You Think You Know song. I forget, it's FYTOK or something. It's not. It's definitely not that. But that was one of my favorite parts in that song. I really like that song. Yeah, Self Destruction's really good. Choke, Visceral, all their like really heavy hitting songs I love to bump in the gym, as I said. But I also really like their softer songs, especially Closure and Doomed, which is the album ender. They really have an emotional depth to them, and I know a lot of their songs deal with suicide and thoughts of suicide, which I think at least the clean vocalist has struggled with depression. I know a lot, and so I have a lot of mental health stuff in my family, and so that really struck home to me. I think it can be a little grim and nihilistic at times, but it still is really beautiful with the struggle. And I mean, the name of the band is I Prevail, and that's kind of the overarching theme. And the message is that despite struggles and despite adversity and despite people telling them they can't, people putting them down, or their own mental health issues putting them down, they prevail. And so this band just really impressed me this year. After I think most people prefer Trauma, but to me, this album, it was leaps and bounds better. And maybe it just hit me in the right place this year. But yeah, definitely really surprised me and rose up the rankings a lot, because when I sat down, I thought, like, what do I really listen to? And that's one of the things I have to rate it on. Yes, subjectively, are the songs as good as Polyphia? Well, maybe not. Like, technically, they're not. But I'm listening to this on repeat and I'm loving it all the time. And so, subjectively, I just have to say, yeah, number three, it's a fitting spot for it. But now we move to, ooh, we move back. Now we move to the big boys of, oh, I'm still going back. Let me go here. What am I doing here? Okay, so now we move to my top two. And number two, A Window of the Waking Mind by Coheed and Cambria. Oh, the lighting's really bad on the camera there. I apologize, but you can just bathe in the resplendent glory and brilliance of the photo. Window of the Waking Mind, really, I had low expectations going in, because I had heard the singles. I really liked Shoulders. I really came to love Rise Nea Nasha. But Liars Club and Comatose, I kind of dismissed. I listened to them once or twice, and then I didn't give them a second listen, which is crazy because Coheed and Cambria has been my favorite band and was my favorite band from like 2009, I want to say, when I was in grade I think it was a grade 9, and I had a good friend, and she was like, we were talking about bands, and we were both kind of into like emo, screamo type of bands, and we're talking, oh yeah, I love that band, I love that band, and then somehow Coheed and Cambria came up from her because I'd never heard of it before. She's like, oh, don't listen to that band, they suck. And so of course I listen to Coheed and Cambria, I listen to Welcome Home, which is probably their most popular song, and is on Guitar Hero or Rock Band or one of those two. And it was that song paired with a video of the movie Troy with Brad Pitt. And I thought this was so epic. I thought it was the official music video at the time because I didn't know anything about music videos and stuff. But I was like, this is awesome. Like, what was my friend talking about? And so I went from that. I listened to all of their albums that were out, which I think were just their first three. And I think No World for Tomorrow came out the year after. And so I've been in love with Coheed and Cambria since I started listening to them. But I will say that, like, I love their first three albums the most. The fourth album, No Work for Tomorrow, I think is really good, and I did listen to it a lot, but it wasn't as good as the three. I think a Year of the Black Rainbow, super underrated. Does not get enough love, to be honest. And it's really grown on me over the years, and I like listening to that album, even though I think it is seen as one of the worst of their albums, and I don't agree with that at all. I think it's one of their best. It's their most solid. It might not have the biggest standouts, but I think every song on that album is like really, really good. And this album, A Window of the Waking Mind, which came out years later, I also think does not have a bad song on the album and is just super consistent throughout and still has some of the high highs for me. But yeah, I mean, this album came after their first. This is Axis of Act Two. The full name is Vaxis Act Two: A Window of the Waking Mind, because Coheed's got to have their long titles, and it comes after Vaxis Act One, The Unheavenly Creatures, which I really loved and thought was a turn to form. So after Year of the Black Rainbow, they came out with, I believe, Afterman Ascension and Descension, and I didn't love those albums. I think Ascension's quite good. I don't think Dissension is that good personally. And so I was kind of weary on them, and then they came out with the No Concept album, which didn't have anything to do with Coheed and Cambria, the comics that Claudio writes. And I kind of dismissed it, but I do find Atlas and especially Atlas and Peace to the Mountain and The Audience I really love from that album. So I think all of their albums have good songs. But they kind of been like disappointing me personally for a while. And I think Unheavenly Creatures was a big step up. But this album kind of it's very different from Unheavenly Creatures in some ways, but it does still feel like a continuation of the same story. And uh, but one thing that it did was it kept the songs, most of them except for the last three, are all like 3 minute songs or 3.5 minute songs, which I think is a great length for what they do because it's kind of gotten a little more poppy. They started in progressive rock roots, and they've kind of done metal-ish songs. They've done all different types, which I like that they reinvent themselves and they don't get stuck in a rut that way. But it does make it harder for audiences or their fans rather to really latch onto all of their work. At least I've found, and for me that's been the case. But Unheavenly Creatures was great. Every song was like at least, I think almost every song was 5 minutes long or more, which made, and it was like I don't know, 15-song album, and it was really, really long. And so I love that album, but it's hard to sit through. Whereas this is like the easiest thing to sit through, even though it's still 50 minutes long. I think Vaxis 1 Unheavenly Creatures was like an hour and 20 or something. It's like basically watching a movie. This is just under an hour. But man, it's so repeat. Like after you finish it, you just want to roll back into the beginning. Like it's such easy listening, and I mean that in the best possible way because it does have some technicality. But that's not what I go to Coheed and Cambria for. I love the stories, even though I don't read the novels. I like to picture the stories when I listen to the music, and they just have some catchy stuff. I mean, I love. Shoulders was great. I think I just played it way too much. It was my number one song that I played in 2021 before when it was just a single. and but I really really love Rise and Anisha. As I said, those it was also a single, but Ladders of Supremacy. Oh my goodness, what a song! It is probably the best song on the album. I would say Rise and Anisha might be my favorite, but it is really close second. Also really loved A Disappearing Act and Love Murder One. They're back to back songs. I love the beginning. I think this has the best prologue song of Coheed and Cambria with Embers of Fire. Um, and and it's little Alice is singing on it, which is great, which is Claudio's real life son, and he opens the album, which I just think is so great about this album that's about father and son and parents and their children. And it just is a beautiful story and a beautiful album. And I think every song on the album I gave a 9 out of 10 to or higher, aside from Bad Man, which I probably would give an 8 out of 10 to. I used to dislike it more, but I think I have no problems with it. I wouldn't skip it. And then I would give Rise and Ladders and probably Window of the Waking Mind, just because it is a long song and it is very experimental, but it gives you back that prog rock feel. Um, I'd probably give all those three, which close out the album, a 10 out of 10. And so it just goes out on a high note, which I also love. And so it was such a triumph to go in with low expectations and then just have the album blow me out of the water. Again, this has been my favorite band from probably 2009 to 2020. And then a new band took over, which also came out with an album this year that hasn't been on here yet. And so we're gonna get to that now. But yeah, Window of the Waking Mind, I love. It's my favorite. It's probably my fourth favorite album behind their first three. And I just love listening to it, and I don't get sick of it. And I hope that'll be the case for years to come, because I was super impressed and was just really happy to have another thing to really praise Coheed and Cambria after, like, I think this is 20 years after their first album, so they've been doing it for a while. It's their 10th studio album, I believe. So well done, Coheed. And now I did the thing again. Not True Power again. Number one, Jackpot Juicer by Dance Gavin Dance. Look, this is obviously, I got mixed feelings about this now because of the allegations that came out about Tillian, which just suck. If they're true, that's awful, and I don't agree with him going back into the band. I hope that the guilt of that will rack him, and that he'll own up to it and take accountability for his actions if he did it. There's no proof one way or the other per se, and there's been no charges, and so he's been allowed to kind of go free and join the band back. And it's tough because this, honestly, when I reviewed it on my channel, was my favorite album of the year, and I still hold it's my favorite album of all time. There's 18 songs on this album, not a single one of them are bad. And musically, it just is amazing. And look, Tillian Pearson has been my favorite vocalist since 2020, when I discovered Chucky versus the Giant Tortoise, when Spotify just shuffled Dance Gavin Dance into my list, and now I love all their albums. This is my favorite, but Mothership is a close second. That was the one that introduced me to all of this craziness. And so it sucks because my favorite singer, it's like that saying, never get to know your heroes, or like, just don't idolize people, don't put them on a pedestal, because ultimately they're capable of the same evil that anybody else is, including myself. And so, and then if the allegations are false, then, this is a black cloud that's going to hang over them regardless, because there's going to be people that think it's true, whether it is or not. And so, it is an end of an era, and even more so by the tragic passing of Tim Furyk, their bassist. And I'll be honest, like, I don't often pay attention to the bassists in bands, and that's on that's on me. I think a lot of people overlook them, but honestly, he added so much to this album. I just think of Feels Bad Man and Pray to God for Your Mother, which is my favorite song on the album. They just very like bass heavy. Like you can just see how much creativity and input that Tim put into this last album. And so, as much as there's a controversy with Tillian, I just think like this is Tim's last album, and so I'm glad that they, because all this stuff came out I think before the release of the album. I'm glad that they went ahead and released it and didn't push it back. And this really is in honor of Tim and who he was and the musician that he was, and like everybody's on their A game in this. Like, and it's great we got Andrew Wells as a full-time member. I thought he was going to take over for lead singing, even though they would need somebody that could sing the Tillian era stuff. Um, it doesn't matter now. Tillian's back in the band as of I don't know when, a while back. But yeah, I have really mixed feelings about that. But I don't have mixed feelings about this album. This album unequivocally is amazing. And if you separate the art from the artists, which there's a lot of other artists on here that didn't have terrible allegations against them, and poured their heart and soul into this. And so this is just amazing. Like I said, Pray to God for Your Mother is my favorite. It's a very different sounding song, and I love when Dance Gavin Dance does their different sounding songs, like Death of the Robot with Human Hair, or Honey Revenge, or any of their ones that are like very like different than any other Dance Gavin Dance song. And they do that so well, even though they do their their style is just amazing. And like I love John Mess, the unclean vocalist for this band. He's never sounded better. And when Synergy came out, I listened to that thing so much that on my Spotify Wrapped, I had listened to it 293 times. Just the single version of it. That wasn't even the version that's on the album. So it was by far my highest listened to song of the year on my Spotify Wrapped. All 5 of my top songs on Spotify Wrapped were from this album: Cream of the Crop, Pray to God for Your Mother, Synergy, and I'm not sure what else was on there. Um, probably Have a Great Life, and Ember, maybe. Those were also really high on my list. But honestly, like, I'd say 13 of these songs on this 18 song album, I would probably give a 10 out of 10 to, in terms of like how good a song they are. And that's a Dance Gavin Dance 10 out of 10, which is higher than a lot of other albums 10 out of 10. But this band just has it all in terms of like the vocals. I love and getting Andrew's vocals in on this as well was amazing. When all 3 of them, Tillian, John, and Andrew, are singing together, it's just amazing. That's why I love the end of Have a Great Life, or Swallowed by Eternity, or his biggest song that he has on the album is For the Jeers. That's like an Andrew centric one. And so it's great to see him added, because he's been on Afterlife, and he's been on, or not Afterlife, Artificial Selection, and he's been on Afterburner. And I think those are the 2 albums that he's been featured on before. Love Idola Architects came out last year. That album would be one of my top ones, if not my top one of 2021. I didn't do one last year, but yeah, I mean, this album is perfection in my mind, or as close to it as you can get. And with 18 songs, that's quite a feat. But yeah, I just say rest in peace to Tim, and condolences to his family and friends. But like, he left us just an amazing album, that I hope I'll be listening to for years to come. I understand the people that can't listen to this band anymore. That's just the sad reality when allegations come out now, is that yeah, it's gonna ruin, it's gonna put a bitter taste in people's mouths, and they just can't look past that, which I get. And this band is like had a troubled past before with Johnny Craig, who is my second favorite vocalist that they've had, and Kurt Travis. I love him in what he's doing now, but he wasn't my favorite back when he did his albums. But I think all of their vocalists have been amazing. So maybe they could have gotten a new one, and it would have been a new era. But yeah, I mean, it is what it is. But this album also is what it is, which is fantastic and perfection. And so that is my top 10 of 2022. I had to split it into two parts, and so I apologize for that. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed. Let me know in the comments if you do watch this video. Feel free to give a like. You don't have to subscribe or unless you want to. I do crappy videos, and I don't put them out very often, but I like to do these type of videos where I rank songs or rank albums or review albums, and I also like to put out some of my own music. Also put out just covers of songs that I really love. So you can check out those. But yeah, and movies. I've been doing movie stuff too, because I love watching movies and love reviewing them. Even though if nobody else cares, that's all right with me. But yeah, let me know what your top 10 were. If you agree with my list or whether you disagree, I'd love to listen to music that I might have missed in 2022. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.